Two friends, Alan Dale and Jerry Carew, who grew up just a few streets apart in St. John's East End, have been separated by Canada's geography for 3 decades. They came together virtually during the pandemic to chat about like-minded interests. Alan lives in PEI and Jerry in Newfoundland. Thriving in remoteness has been a common theme for both of them during the pandemic. Gale Force Winds, the podcast is the result.
And here we are once again on Gale Force Winds in the East End of St. John's, Newfoundland. I'm Alan Dale. With me as always, my good buddy Jerry Carew. How are you, Jerry?
I'm doing fantastic. We have someone with us today that is someone I met during the pandemic for some digital marketing things, and it's just very exciting, Ashley, to have you with us today. I'm going to say no more and just let this conversation evolve.
Yeah, absolutely, Jerry. Well, we've been into a conversation for about a half an hour now already, so I can't wait to dive into it on air here. So, Ashley, without further ado, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. Well, lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Ashley Noseworthy. I'm the CEO and founder of Edgewise Environmental, and I'm currently the chair of the board of Econext, formerly NIA.
And I love the name.
Thank you.
I think you've done a good job of rebranding. Really good job. We'll get into that.
Thank you. Yeah. That was a whole thing unto itself.
Well, you told me last year you were going to do that, and I'm like, dear God, she's really taken on an awful lot in addition to her business. But anyway.
Right? Yeah. So I'm originally from Newfoundland, originally from Pooch Cove. And did my elementary schooling down there. I then went to St. Paul's in the East End here in St. John's and did all of my junior high, and then went to Holy Heart for high school. I went to MUN for my undergrad, and then I discovered my love of traveling.
What did you do as an undergrad?
Biology.
Biology.
Yeah, I did a biology degree.
I did a couple of biology courses. Trying to wrap my head around all the...
I did an undergrad in biology, and I did a minor in English. So English is another love of mine, English literature. And at some point halfway through my biology degree, I thought maybe I'll switch. But I'm glad I didn't, because here we are today. So I took the path that I needed to take.
I did an English course in business school. It was communications, but English, and realized how poorly that I know the English language. I can articulate, but I couldn't write. But anyway.
Right.
Oh, I loved it. I loved it so much. And then I discovered my love of traveling. So after I did my undergrad degree, I actually ended up offshore.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's it's an interesting way of how things happen. So while I was doing my undergrad degree, I was paying for it myself. So I was working in the service industry. And I was working at a local brew pub here in St. John's. Mm-hmm. And somebody came in and we were having a chat. And they said, have you ever heard of Marine Mammal Observer? And I said, no. And they said, well, you know what? It sounds like it might be right up your alley. I had worked at the Ocean Science Center for 12 years in the SEAL lab. It's always been my passion. And they said, well, let me put you in touch with some people and see where it goes. So I ended up in England training for a couple of courses. Wow. And fast forward, I came back, and then I ended up offshore and spent 10 years doing that and a master's degree in England.
So your foundation is in a brew pub? Is that what you're telling us?
No! It's where you make all your best connections.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, tell me about that. I mean, that's really fascinating. Like, you get into a conversation with somebody at this brew pub, and they introduce you to this new role.
Alan and I, when we were in the Navy, never went to any brew pubs, just so you know.
Never. No, I can't imagine any Navy or military personnel ever going to a pub ever. I made some really great connections working in the service industry because people come and go and they travel and they're in and out. But if you're willing to kind of chat and ask certain questions and open up or say, I'm doing biology in school. Well, what do you love about biology? Well, I'm focusing on marine mammals. Oh, well, wow. Have you ever heard about this? And I've found myself doing the same when I travel now as well.
It's interesting because I said to you when we were chatting upstairs that, you're very open. And I think this is another example as to why opportunity potentially comes your way because you're open like that, right?
Well, listen, and not only opportunity tends to come your way, but you've got to be willing to take it, right? When it comes.
Yes, absolutely. Or listen.
Or listen, right?
Yep.
So you decided you were going to go off to the UK. Was that the first time you traveled outside of Newfoundland? Or?
No, the first time I ever stepped on a plane was when I was 17. So my mother, single mom, 3 kids, raised us by herself. She is a superwoman, did her master's while teaching full time and raising all of us. And I was in grade 12, and she knew that this would probably be the last chance that we'd be able to do like a family vacation. Yeah. So that Christmas was really special to me. So we had our regular Christmas, nothing was different, and we sit down for breakfast, and she goes, oh, I forgot something, and it's classic mom. She'll always forget a gift, like always. So we're sitting down for breakfast, and she comes out with these envelopes, and we're like, oh, these are nice, and we open it up, and it's, you're going to Cuba. And so she brought us to Cuba for Easter break.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when I was 17.
That's fantastic.
And so that was my first time on a plane, and I have not looked back since. I've accumulated some air miles, some significant air miles.
When you started that, I said, she forgets a gift. Did she forget to bring someone to Cuba?
No, everybody was in Cuba.
Okay,
yeah.
all right.
So brothers and sisters?
Yes, so I have a brother and sister, and then my mom remarried when I was 21. So I have 2 stepbrothers and a stepsister.
Right.
And of course, then we have, in-laws in there. Right. And now I actually have a nephew. I have 2 brand new identical twin girl nieces. Right. And we're just about to have one next week. Another nephew. Yeah.
That's fantastic. So it sounds like a lot of fun. Right,
it is. So family is very important. It's a core value, I think, for myself, and I've realized this as I've gotten older. That they're the rock and the foundation.
Yeah, there's something really good about having that foundation, isn't there? Right? Yeah. That you feel more confident to step out and do different things when you know that you've got a solid foundation from which to work from.
On that note, my wife, as I was telling you, went to Montreal with my 2 boys last night, and I was home alone. It's like, Alan goes, how was your night? I said, I didn't sleep very well. So it reminded me of how much I really love those people. And glad to have you 2 here today, but I do miss them too.
Yes, I was about to say, it's never a replacement, but you realize that they're the ones that you lean on the most in the hard times and the ones that will lift you up the most in the good times. And again, shout out to my mother because she loves every Facebook post of my business. And I appreciate everything.
I have a feeling she'll watch this podcast.
Maybe. Yeah, that's right.
Tell me about the education experience in the UK. How was that?
My master's in the UK is one of the most, I think, pivotal moments in my life and one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Mm-hmm. So my master's was only a little more than a year, so I actually wrote a thesis and did a full course load in that time. It was very intense.
Where in the UK?
In Newcastle.
In Newcastle.
Yeah, so right up, it was about a 45-minute train ride from Edinburgh.
Right, yeah.
And I had never been there before.
Beautiful part of the world.
So it's gorgeous. So I had never been to Newcastle before. So when I showed up, this was my introduction to Newcastle. And I just went for it. I knew I wanted to do a master's. I knew that I wanted to do it about 3 years out from my undergrad. I didn't want to leave too much space. And so I sought out 3 schools, applied to 3 of them, and then chose out of that. And so my master's is in International Marine Environmental Consultancy. Okay. It's a mouthful. Yeah. And my thesis that I wrote, my paper, was focused in harbor porpoise acoustics around a renewable energy or a wind farm site along the Northumberland coast. Okay. So those wind farms have actually been put in since.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just, before we get into the detail of that, what's interesting listening to you talk, I learned a lot traveling with the Navy and the Naval Reserve. What I love about what you've articulated here is you're away, you're studying, you're in university, but the combination of being away is something I never actually got to experience. I went to Memorial for both degrees, but I really like that. You leave a class and you're in a whole other environment, and that's an education in and of itself.
It is.
So. Yeah. Anyway, it's a great combination.
Especially in Newcastle. You can get quite an education up there.
I thought I was pretty great with accents, but it took me a moment.
Well, the Geordie.
I was about to say the Geordie accent. Yeah. I love it. And now I find is anytime anybody speaks, whether it's on television or I'm watching a video, I can immediately tell. I was like, oh, they're from the north.
Yeah.
So it's been, it's been fantastic that way. And I have some really great friends from that area, and I regularly go back to the UK. For me, it almost feels like a second home.
Yeah,
Wow.
right. Yeah, I remember being in Newcastle and, growing up in Newfoundland, I'd heard some accents in my life, and I got up there and I said, what are they saying? But it's, anyway, but it's a wonderful place for sure. So that sounds like a wonderful educational journey for sure. Tell me about what you're doing now. What is the business you're in?
So I started my business in 2018. If we backtrack a little bit, I actually incorporated my business in 2015.
Okay.
But I knew that perhaps that wasn't the best time for me to launch a business.
Mm-hmm.
There was things happening in the kind of oil and gas sector where I knew
Mm-hmm.
that we might enter first.
Mm-hmm.
There was a dip in the market, so I actually sat and waited.
Okay.
So why did you incorporate if that was the case? Why
Because
did you
I
do
wanted
that?
it on paper. I wanted to make sure that the name couldn't be taken
Good
because
point.
I'm very much a planner. And it was something that I knew that if I incorporated it and I wrote it down and it was on paper, that I would follow through. So I didn't want it to be an idea anymore. Yeah. I wanted it to live somewhere. And so if that's in like the deeds of Newfoundland, then perfect.
And you're at what stage where are you right now while the incorporation papers are being filled out? What is it you're doing at that moment? Are you working for someone else? Or are you just out of school?
I was teaching offshore survival and helicopter ditching.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, to civilian, military, and aviation personnel.
Here in Newfoundland?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, up in Whitburn, right?
No, so it's in Mount Pearl.
Oh, Mount Pearl, okay.
Yeah, in Mount Pearl.
Right on.
So I started with them in 2015 as one of their original 4 instructors and spent 3 years from the time from 2015 to 2018 as a full-time instructor.
So you like to be close to the water.
I do. Do you notice a theme?
I'm getting a theme.
Yes.
I got to jump in there. Remember what Jeff LeDrew from Jumping Bean said to us? He said, the worst thing you do is get attached to a paycheck. Let's explore that a little bit. So you had a paycheck.
Yeah. I had a full-time job, and
this is the point of inspiration.
Yeah.
We haven't explored it a lot on this,
Right.
but I know that some people that I talked to said, dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
How do you go from getting a regular paycheck to that leap into your own? Just talk a little bit about that, because I think that's the inspiring part of
It's
this.
terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. But you realize perhaps that what you're doing for the paycheck isn't as fulfilling as what you envision for yourself or what you've built behind the scenes, and you're ready for that to be a thing. I also realized, and I'm very much a planner and an overthinker and all of these things. And I remember sitting down and thinking to myself, I don't have children. I'm not married. So if this all falls flat, there's inherently less risk for me. And I appreciate that. And so I look up to those people that have the families and the children and whatnot that have more to lose. Mm-hmm. So I knew that, okay, I can take the risk here in my life, and I know that if it perhaps doesn't go the way I want it to go, that I could potentially pick myself up. And so that's kind of one of those things that I thought, if I don't do it now, I never will.
But that fear is palpable, isn't it? It's
every day.
So you're ready to pull the plug. Did you have a contract lined up with someone at that point, or nothing? You're going into the abyss?
No, so I actually did have a little bit of like a partnership or whatnot with another company. And I knew that I did have a number of courses and things lined up, so things were getting busier. Right. And it was hitting that point that as I was working on it behind the scenes, that it was starting to overtake what I was doing for a full-time job. Yeah. It was hitting that tipping point.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting down and talking to my supervisor or my boss at the job where I'm getting a full-time paycheck and saying, I'm going to go do this.
And what was the response?
The response was really positive.
Right.
And it was, yep, okay. I said, I can be part-time for a while, or, I understand if you don't want that. Yeah. And they said, no, whatever we can kind of do to support you.
Yeah.
So that was really great.
It's fun, right, to talk that through, because we often think when we make that leap that it's a very binary thing.
No.
It has to be this, then that. There is hybrid solutions along the way where you can blend both those worlds together to transition. And when you're very upfront and you lay it all on the table for everybody involved, it's amazing how they want to help you get to where you want to get to, isn't it?
It is, but I learned that at a young age. So when I was 12, I started volunteering at the Ocean Science Center in the SEAL Lab. And 12, probably to most people listening to this or watching this, would be like, who let you volunteer at 12?
Yeah.
Your mother, obviously.
Obviously. But I remember, so I told my mom I want to volunteer. I want it to be in marine biology, and she suggested the SEAL Lab. Great, can you call for me? Absolutely not. You have to call yourself. And so this is my mother. Nope, if you want it, you have to call. Okay. So I called down and I talked to somebody, and in my 12-year-old rambling way explained how passionate I was and how much I wanted to volunteer. And he said, yes, yeah, come in. We'll give you a test run on the weekends if you really want to volunteer. And I remember I had the same boss the whole time.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I remember looking at him years later, and I was like, what made you think that this was a good idea? He was like, you were really adamant. And I was like, I was.
You are convincing.
Yeah, I was adamant. But I mean, I worked there for 12 years.
Really?
I volunteered, and then I worked part-time during my my degree, full-time during the summers, and then I worked full-time for 2 years. So, I mean, it was a good investment.
Right.
But that person in that role always said, if there's something else you want to do, if there's another job that you're looking at, be open, tell me, I will help you. It helps you, it helps me, we can all plan, and then we can transition easier. And I learned that at a young age of like, this is the way I want to be, this is the type of kind of communication that I want. And so perhaps that's where that comes from, is just being that open and honest of, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to do it. So, like, if somebody tells me, no, you're not, I'm going to go, yeah, I am.
I know I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, that's
I can almost read Alan's mind now.
That's mentorship at a very, very early age, isn't it? Yeah.
Very much.
Tell me the importance of mentorship to you, and I'm sure you're probably mentoring others right now.
Sure. Mentorship was incredibly important, and I don't think I really realized it until perhaps the position that I'm in, starting my own company and growing that, of looking back and going, those people were really pivotal.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yes, of course, your parents and whatnot, that, we all have those core people. But, that person at the Ocean Science Center that taught me, be open, be honest, you tell me if there's something else you want to do, or tell me if there's something that's not working. That was really pivotal. I've worked with some really great supervisors that have allowed me the space to kind of grow, because I remember stepping into one position and I had somebody, they had a PhD. Mm-hmm. They looked at me and they had only known me for a couple of hours, and they said, you're going to be bored in this position within 3 months. I was like, but you don't know me. He was like, but I know the type of person you are. And he was right. And so that supervisor in that role allowed me the space to kind of go and do other things to stimulate my mind. Yeah. So I've had that privilege of those great mentors all in my life.
There's nothing worse than being bored in a job. Like, it's mind-numbing. Yeah. I've been there. I've had that unfortunate experience, although it was a great learning experience. You get to know what you don't want to do, right? Yeah. So it's fascinating listening to you talk about that. The mentorship piece, all of that. It's just wonderful.
Yeah, 100%. And it's fun that you've had those and you recognize them. And that's a skill, obviously, that you'll now take into your consulting work. But I want to get into exactly the kind of work that you're doing, because the conversation we had before we came on was fascinating.
Ladies and gentlemen, the two of them are going to geek out right now.
You had talked about tracking a whale and watching the pattern of the whale move around the ocean to avoid sound in the ocean. So tell me about that. Just unpack that for me. How much noise there is in the ocean right now.
Yeah, sure.
All you boat owners are going to feel very guilty.
I love a good boat ride. So my big passion that I discovered when I did a volunteer trip to Costa Rica, I was introduced to marine mammal acoustics and sound in the water. And it was one of those pivotal moments in my life. I was doing a volunteer program, and I was introduced to this, and I thought, this is what I want to do in the area of marine biology and marine mammals. And so I've carried that with me ever since. And I've done a lot of research in this space, and essentially what we were talking about and what I'm really passionate about is that the oceans are getting twice as loud every decade. And that has major impacts on, one, how we do business in and on the ocean as humans, and two, all of those creatures that are living in the ocean. And for me, that specialty is marine mammals. For other people, it's fish. For other people, it's invertebrates. All of these animals produce and interpret sound very differently, and sound can affect them very differently. And so essentially, it's about making our oceans quieter, making our oceans a place where if we're going to increase our footprint on them, that we do it in a way that is quieter and more sustainable as we move into, we're going to transition into a greener, bluer economy, and making sure that we do that responsibly. Because if not, of course, if you think about your whales and dolphins and seals, and those are easy animals to latch onto for people, they can be greatly affected.
How are they affected? Explain to me how they're affected by noise.
So it all depends on the species, and this is what I'll say this with a caveat to all of you watching and to yourselves, is I often say that I need a shirt that says, when it comes to acoustics, it all depends. Right. Because there's so many.
That's a great shirt.
Yeah. There's so many variables.
Yeah.
And so when we think about whales and dolphins, think about baleen whales are affected one way, and toothed whales and dolphins and porpoises are affected another way.
Of course.
So mid to high frequency with teeth, low frequency with baleen. Okay. And so the low frequency sounds can affect your baleen whales quite a bit, whereas your high frequency sounds are going to be more apt to affect your dolphins, porpoises, toothed whales. And that can result in things like avoidance, like changing their migratory patterns. If it's really severe, it can result in acoustic trauma, so any type of trauma to the kind of inner ear area. Or it can increase their stress hormones, their cortisol levels. And when we get elevated levels of stress hormones, then that can cause a lot of damage in regards to how your body functions. It's like humans.
Well,
if we're under a lot of stress, it's going to come out in really kind of wild ways, and it's the same for them.
Wow. And so, what is the biggest source of noise in the ocean right now? Is it shipping?
It would be.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what part of it is it? Propellers, engine noise? What is it exactly?
It would typically be that's the hydrodynamic flow of moving through the water,
right?
And the cavitation from the propellers,
right?
The engine noise, of course, can get out into the water, but those are kind of the big two,
right.
And so we're seeing a lot of programs that are trying to come out now to reduce speed, that reduces sound. So if we look at the west coast of the country in Canada, they have the ECHO program, and essentially what that is that all of the ships that come in through the kind of Juan de Fuca Strait and into the Port of Vancouver, they're asked, would you like to take part in this program? We ask you to slow down to a certain number of knots. They have a very high uptake of that program, and they have a whole monitoring system that's installed underneath the water that's listening to the levels of noise in that particular strait, because they're really concerned about their southern resident killer whales.
Right. So they have hydrophones all along the Strait of Juan de Fuca?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they're monitoring that. That is incredible.
Alan, you and I spent a lot of time in that area. Right? When I was in the Naval Reserve out there, it's such a beautiful area, and killer whales are everywhere.
Yeah.
So they're that kind of like keystone species, that iconic species that when you think of British Columbia, you think of that. But we do have a similar program on the East Coast into the Gulf of St. Lawrence for the North Atlantic right whale.
Yeah.
The one that's critically endangered. That program runs a little bit differently, but these programs are kind of becoming something that's enacted to try and turn down the noise a little bit for these really endangered species.
How many years has this awareness been there? Like, maybe it's been decades, but now the action is starting to happen? Or, just give us a little bit of a thumbnail sketch of how that's, like...
So, the field of acoustics alone, in terms of marine mammal acoustics, or that type of thing, is fairly new. We're talking like the 60s. But in regards to science, that's still fairly new. It's become one of the largest in marine mammal science in terms of acoustics. And we've had to learn a lot before perhaps things can be enacted. And I think we started to realize at a point in time that as people were kind of doing this research to find out, what kind of sounds do bottlenose dolphins make and killer whales make, that they started to hear all of these other sounds in the background. And then it came to the forefront. And so anthropogenic noise or man-made noise has become quite a big topic.
It's complicated, right? Because, the world's commerce moves on the ocean, right? We all know that everything is happening on the ocean. And time,
well, look at the Suez Canal issue.
100%. And time is money for shipping companies, right? They need to get in and out of port as quick as they can and deliver their goods. So asking them to slow down is going to be a complicated conversation. So there's got to be other technology. With that challenge comes other opportunities.
Yes.
So there's got to be other technologies out there. We talked earlier about paint and things like that. Tell us a little bit about that.
There is a wonderful company, and forgive me because I forget their name, but I believe they're out of Cove in Nova Scotia. And they recently did a big project on...
We'll look it up, see what...
Yeah, I was going to say, they have like a graphite type of paint where they did some testing on certain vessels, and it was really for fuel efficiency. So I think they managed to make them like 25% more fuel efficient. And Jerry, please check on that because I hate to get my numbers wrong. But one of the things that they brought out was that the hydrodynamic flow of the vessel moving through the water was much better. And that can decrease sound. And so those types of things where you're getting the increases in technology for, say, fuel efficiency, but then the ability to maybe decrease the sound, that's a big deal. If you can get a twofer like that, that's going to be really great for shipping companies and ferry companies and other industry.
Yeah, and I would imagine that obviously propeller design will change over time to reduce noise and still be efficient and the like.
Graphite Innovation Technologies, I believe. Is that the company?
It sounds familiar, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And then, of course, you've got, as ships and look towards alternative fuel sources and they get into electric motors, and there's a lot of less moving parts and stuff like that, all reducing noise. But the noise factor is quite an interesting variable to put into the equation. We've got to reduce this. But it's interesting, right? Because it probably ties hand in hand with fuel efficiency as well, as you discovered with the paint. So it'll make a lot of sense for them to drop the sound as in order to be a little faster as well. So where does your company position itself into this conversation?
So the company that I created was really founded initially in training.
Okay.
So it's training for marine mammal observers, for passive acoustic monitors, and for seabird observers all across Canada. So we have particular legislation and rules that are enacted in and around things like seismic or any type of energy project that is going to put noise in the water. There are certain rules on protections around marine mammals, and we developed training around those.
That's fantastic. So, like the rules, it's interesting. Government oftentimes is not, they don't catch up in time. So the rules are already in place. And how long have those rules been in place?
Oh, the statement, well, so the kind of fundamental piece is called, for short, it's called the Statement of Canadian Practice. That's the short name. And that's been enacted since, I believe, 2004.
Okay, that's very recent then, really.
Considering, I mean, if you look around the world, if you look to the UK, for example, they're kind of one of the first ones to have these types of rules in place, and they had it in the mid to late 90s. So they were kind of the first ones to the gate. But, of course, each energy project is different. So, we have the Statement of Canadian Practice for seismic, but then you get into, well, what about a geophysical, geotechnical survey for cable laying? What about, we're going to do an expansive port reconstruction. We're going to do, we want to do some type of wind farm offshore. So those types of rules. DFO typically submits gives the project a permit with a whole bunch of rules then saying you need, marine mammal observers or acoustic monitors, and you need to do the following things for marine mammals.
Wow.
Do wind farms make much noise?
They do.
Really?
Yes, yeah. I did my master's in and around wind farms. And so the construction of it, of course, everything around that creates a lot of noise. So if you think about just putting in the monopile, so that big kind of steel beam to put the actual turbine on, you have to do what's called pile driving, which is essentially an ocean jackhammer. And you have to bang that in. So that creates a lot of noise. The barge, the ships around that, all of the surveying that has to be done beforehand.
Right.
And then when you actually get the turbine on it, it starts to spin. It creates a more high frequency noise that can resonate into the water.
I bet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I love listening to Ashley talk. I have not given much thought to any of the things that you know. And
but this is why I love what I do, is because it's perhaps one of those things that, you know, I'm very much an advocate for moving things forward and making things new, but it's always with an air of, but what else can that cause, right? Of make sure we do this, but make sure that we do it in a responsible way or some way that could be better.
But there's so much about the ocean that's unexplored, and it's becoming more and more, I guess, on people's minds. The fact that you're educating people is fantastic. Because
It's
I don't know what percentage of the population gives no thought to the ocean. Probably 80%, maybe 90%.
Which kills me a little, just because it's my whole life.
I know, and then here we are in Newfoundland and UPEI, we're surrounded.
I mean, I think that we are, in this part of the world that we live in, that we're more in touch
Absolutely.
with the ocean.
Right.
But even us, I mean, like what you just described, and I've driven by many offshore turbines, and you look at them, and great, that's doing something for the environment. I've never really gone back and say, well, how did it get there? And what did noise was caused to get there? And what noise is it causing now? Because you're right, I mean, that's a big impact, putting one of those things in.
Pile driver, I can only imagine what that's like. You know?
Yes,
You know,
yeah.
It's just unbelievable, right? And there has to be better technologies, right, to go out and survey and things. You probably don't need ships out there doing it. You can do it with drones and things now that are making less noise. So it really brings up a fascinating conversation. Certainly, and again, I mean, we're in touch with it because we see it every day, but there's people watching this podcast from Saskatchewan saying, what are they talking about?
Well, I was going to say, and a shout out to the birds and bat people as well, because when you get wind turbines going, I mean, offshore, for seabirds, that's an issue for migratory routes. As you get them closer to shore, of course, birds and bats and the number of fatalities that can cause. So monitoring those is a big thing. So people in the science world, perhaps, you know, anytime we come out with a new technology and this is great and this is going to, this is going to be the benefits, perhaps we're always a little bit judgy of,
Right.
but how is it going to, what type of change is it causing?
Yeah.
Is it a good change? What good change? What bad change? But how?
Yeah.
Right? And can that be mitigated?
Yeah.
Well, it's important, to be able to be critical of things, right?
Oh, 100. I mean, look,
Constructively critical.
Facebook.
Exactly. I was going to say,
Facebook.
I mean, that's a deep, dark hole, but
I don't want to go down the Facebook hole, but really, I mean, on the surface, well, that's a great idea. Let's connect everybody, and right.
Yeah.
And if you left it there, that's great. But obviously there's a lot more things you need to research on this. So I'm glad that you brought that up. But there's one area I'd like to kind of touch on that's it's new, and it's not new, but it's certainly front and center in the conversation right now. That's the Arctic. So there's got to be a lot of concern right now as that sea route opens up, as we look to do business up there, as we maybe even get into mineral exploration in the Arctic. How is that going to, and that's got to be a fairly sensitive ecosystem up there.
very much so.
Yeah.
And so my experience, just kind of starting out with my experience in that, is I remember being on a vessel, and once you cross 60 degrees, you're in the Arctic Circle.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were not allowed to cross 60 because all of the rules changed in terms of the energy project that I was part of. Yes. So you're not allowed to cross because there are other permits that you would need, other types of, there's just all of this extra.
Jesus, I'm learning a lot today. I had no idea.
Yeah. But in the Arctic, as things change and there becomes perhaps less ice or ships are able to move through that, it's going to be really important that we understand the baseline, because it's a really sensitive ecosystem. How sound moves underneath the ice can be very different to how it moves in open ocean. Mm-hmm. And like that example that I gave, the statement of Canadian practice, that actually is exclusive to non-ice covered water.
Right.
So it's actually said in the rules, like this only applies to non-ice covered waters. Mm-hmm. So
was that with a thought to address ice-covered waters, or
Yes.
it wasn't an oversight?
No, not at all. But it's to address the fact that you can't use these same rules in the Arctic.
Yeah.
Because it is so sensitive. And when you think about, you have, your beluga whale populations, your narwhal populations, gray whale and bowhead, and, you have your polar bears and all of your seal populations that go up there to have their pups. And, they're going up there for a reason. To put ships in there through that, to do a lot of exploration, really disturbs that environment.
Sure does.
And, and is it possible to do that in a sustainable way? Do we know?
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, we don't even have the Arctic charted.
No.
From a navigation point of view. I mean, so that's where we are.
Yeah.
So you can only imagine where we are on the science of sound in the Arctic.
So there are some really wonderful researchers.
Yeah.
I have to give credit. There are some really wonderful researchers around the world, including from Canada, that do go up into the Arctic and have done a lot of research, but continue to do great research in that aspect. But again, it's those layers of, you have your acoustic researchers, and then, your marine mammal researchers, and then you have the economic side of it, the political side of it. All of these things have to come together.
Yeah.
Cultural.
Yes, very much
Right.
so. You have indigenous groups that are in those areas, and that's extremely important. And it's very complex.
Actually, when Alan and I were on the HMCS Toronto, we asked a lot of the sailors, what's the most incredible place you've been? Multiple young 20-year-old sailors said the Arctic.
Yeah.
I was shocked because, in my day, all I wanted to do was go south on a ship, right? I want to get on a beach, They were just talking about the beauty and the experience in the Arctic, and I was shocked by that. I couldn't believe it.
Well, I was indeed taken aback by it as well. My entire career in the Navy, it was always South Europe. It was never a consideration to go to the Arctic, but to hear them talk about it and how it impacted them and touched them, must be pretty special.
Yeah, I haven't been yet.
Yeah.
I hope to go. The Arctic and the Antarctic are pretty high on my list.
Right.
The furthest north I've been has been, besides for perhaps overseas, but keeping with it within Canada, would be perhaps Nain, Labrador.
Yeah. Right.
And that is an incredible place.
Yeah, we interviewed Chris Flanagan, CEO of Baffin Fisheries, and he spends a lot of time up in the Arctic.
Labrador. I was about to say, but Labrador and into the Arctic, it's special.
Stunning, isn't it?
It's special.
Actually, you must be traveling in a small pack. How many people in the world are looking at how acoustics are affecting marine mammals?
You'd be surprised.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be surprised. So to give some context to it, we had the World Marine Mammal Conference in December of 2019 in Barcelona, pre-COVID. 1,800 marine mammal researchers there.
Okay.
And the largest section was acoustics.
Okay.
Really?
Wow.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it by far took over any of the other. They had to double the size and the capacity of the room for the acoustics room for all of the talks that were being given.
When is that going to come to St. John's of your
We've had it in Halifax.
Oh, really?
We have, and we've had it in Vancouver, I believe, Vancouver, Victoria. So the next one, unfortunately, it got delayed for this year. It's biennial, but they're moving it to next year in Florida, and then in 2023 it happens in Perth, Australia. Nice. So they move it constantly, but that was only the second time in 2019 they ever had a world one.
Who are the big movers in this area? Like, what countries are the big movers in?
In terms of underwater noise?
Yeah.
Europe.
Europe, yeah.
I just have to blanket it and say Europe.
Right.
It's because they're so far into perhaps their industry, oil and gas, renewable energy, those types of things, that they have those types of advancements or even kind of rules and regulations.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is it because they have a lot of offshore wind,
They do.
right?
Yeah.
It's amazing what they have to go look for though when they're putting up wind turbines offshore. It's hard to believe, but they still have to go out and survey for sea mines from World War I.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Before they start driving, yeah. But they're you're right, it's a very sophisticated system they have set up over there. Well, that's good, though. It's amazing to hear, though, that people are focusing on it and we're looking at it. And it sounds like, because the movement of vessels on the sea, it's not going to slow down. anytime
No.
soon. And I mean, slow down maybe not be the right term. There's going to be there's not going to be less of them for sure, right?
Yep.
So we've got to figure this out. That's fantastic. If you were to look over the horizon, which is an apt term here today, but if you were to look over the horizon, where would you see yourself going in this field, or is there something else you'd like to explore as well?
I, of course, always want to grow my business. I would like to, make sure that we're established as kind of one of the leaders when it comes to R&D is very near and dear to my heart. So building more of an R&D capacity as well as a consulting capacity. And on a personal note, and I haven't been able to shake this, maybe it'll come to fruition, maybe it won't. I would love to do a PhD.
Okay.
Yeah, as if I need more on my plate.
Right.
If my mom is watching this,
Yeah.
she will absolutely shudder. But
It was funny, we interviewed Tom Davis, who owns the business, and he actually went back to university in the middle of the pandemic, and it was, yeah. No, I understand that.
Where would you like to do it? Do you have somewhere in mind?
I don't, but I think I kind of have the topic down.
Right.
It's taken me a while. At first I thought I wanted to do it in pure acoustics, but I think I would like to do it in policy and acoustics.
Oh,
So I would like to take a little bit more of a kind of policy and political twist to any type of PhD that I do, and looking at the effectiveness of any type of rules, regulations, and legislation that we would bring into Canada. Because, of course, we have the largest coastline in the world, and these rules, regulations, and legislation are changing. And so I would love to do a PhD on how those can be most effective and kind of look at case studies around the world.
Is there supervisors in mind that you'd like to study under?
I have looked, and it's actually really difficult to try. There are people around the world that have done this.
Right.
So I'm very much at kind of the preliminary stages of perhaps narrowing down some people that I might target.
I want to take it into the volunteer role. You're chair of Econext.
Mm-hmm.
What an interesting organization that is. And I know in our discussions way back in the pandemic, and you were telling me that you were taking over as chair and you had some vision. You've changed the name from NIA to Econext. Kudos to you on that. I think the website and everything, the whole branding is really well done. I've got 30 years in marketing, so I really like what you've done there. What is your vision for Econext? And is your term continuing, or like how long is the term as your chair? Correct?
Yes,
chair of the
currently
board.
chair.
Yeah.
So first of all, I have to give a shout out to the Econext staff for all of the hard work that they put in there, because those personnel, I mean, I just can't reiterate enough that there are a handful of people in that office ever. It's not a huge team, and the amount of work that they do, even around the rebranding, was incredible.
Yeah.
So props to them. My term ends in March, and then we jokingly say that we're cast off the island. So I've spent 4 years in the association right now, and then of course I need to step out for a year before I can perhaps step back in. So
you're not past chair for a year? Does it work?
No, we don't have a past chair.
So you're
literally booted right out.
Injection seat. That's an interesting way to do it, because when I was chair of the YMCA, I always joked I ended up in the Senate, because you do linger around for a little bit.
Right.
Not that I had any
I'm
real
still
advice.
a member of Econext,
Yeah.
and the wonderful thing about that organization is that you can call up or show up at the office or ask, Kieran, hey, I saw this, or I need this, or what's Econext doing with this, and they're completely open. So you never lose that connection if you don't want to.
It's funny, I think about Newfoundland. You've heard me say this. If you look at the picture or the map of Newfoundland, you see the Trans-Canada Highway. Just to put a visual in everyone's head, the amount of land below, we're not even talking about Labrador here now, but below the Trans-Canada Highway that's unexplored. I think the leadership that organization is going to need to show over the next decades is huge, because I think the expansion into the resources of Newfoundland are going to be huge. I think people, I'm listening, there's so much opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the vision.
Yeah.
And so we really sat down and this has been coming for the past couple of years, but we really sat down perhaps in the last year or two and said, really, where do we want the association to be? Where is it now? Where does it need to go? And we need to be stronger advocates for A, B, C, D. And that's definitely one of those things. So, you know, when it comes in, when things like kind of the renewable energy policy and plan come in, when it comes to exploration, all of those things have an environmental attachment to them. Anything that we do on our land or around our oceans has an environmental. So we kind of transcend all other industries.
Right.
And we just want to make sure that we're really well established to advocate for all of that, that we're really representing the breadth of knowledge and skill set that we have in Newfoundland, and that we're also showcasing that on a global scale as well. Because I think that's really important for our businesses here, is that, you know, to stay in Newfoundland and to grow in Newfoundland is one thing, but then to grow and then export and show what we can do here is a completely different ballgame, and that's a really important one.
It's funny, you know, in the early 90s, I did some video work up in Labrador, and I was in contact with two Norwegians were with us, and I think they, to me, seem to be so far ahead of us. And I was just in awe in listening to them talk about the way they were handling things. Yeah. So it's interesting listening to you talk now. I think we're heading in that direction, you know.
I absolutely, I know that things can be doom and gloom right now, and I know that, you know, the province is in a tough spot, and, you know, we all know that. We all feel that. We all hear that incessantly, and it can really get us down. I have a lot of hope for the future, and there are a lot of people, and for those people that are watching or whatnot, there's just so many people, and maybe you're some of them, that are working behind the scenes to push hard on making sure that we can get out of this, and making sure that we can diversify and be stronger, and be better as well. So, you know, I think that there's definitely a tough road ahead for us to overcome these things, but we can do it.
It's funny, I said to Jesse Sterling yesterday, you know, his grandfather said to me, he said, I always feel bad for someone who's not a Newfoundlander, you know. I feel sorry for someone who's not a Newfoundlander. And it's true, you know, what an incredible province this is.
An incredible province, and a province where you have the ability to be global leaders in things. And I'll give you a great story of that in your field, not necessarily in the marine mammal field, but certainly in the environmental field. I was at a conference once in, I think it was Bodo, Norway, and it was around hydrogen and the use of production of hydrogen through wind. And there was Icelanders there. There was people from the Faroe Islands, Norwegians, Danes. There's people from Orkney Islands were there as well. Anyway, everybody was boasting about their hydrogen, you know, plan, and how they were converting the excess wind energy into hydrogen and using it for their ferries and cars and things like that. And I think it was the Icelandic gentleman actually stood up and he said, I just want you to know that Newfoundland beat everybody to this in Ramia, down in Ramia, and they had set up their first hydrogen village, and were just following their path. And I was a Canadian in the room, and I'm thinking, oh my God, I didn't even know that, right? Like,
I also didn't know this until recently, so I feel bad.
So I'm thinking, oh my God, the Icelander was teaching me about Newfoundlander.
Oh no!
Yeah, I'm from Prince Edward Island.
But there was a report that came out that there's a multi-billion-dollar industry to be had here
100%.
In regards to hydrogen.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a lot of jobs. It's a lot of jobs. It's
right?
a lot of income for the province, and you know, it's only positive. Yeah. But we need to be able to capitalize on that in the correct way.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting point you make. You know, I love tech, right? That being said, though, there's construction, there's environmental, there's opportunities for everyone, and I think, you know, having incredible entrepreneurs like yourself and being able, what's interesting about you, and another guy that I know well and we interviewed is Craig Rowe, you know, having a business is one thing, but then taking on the role that you've taken on as chair while you're busy with your business, to me, is one of the most commendable things you could ever do.
Thanks, Jerry.
Well, you know, the pressure of payroll and making that work is one thing.
It is,
and then you're going to jump out and fill your mind with tasks to be the leader of Econext.
And look at a PhD.
Right, I know. I mean, to anybody watching this, they're like, this woman's insane.
So Ashley, a great conversation for sure, and really opened our eyes to things that we were unaware of. Embarrassed to say unaware of, but I'm really glad.
But you know now.
Yeah, we know now, and glad we had this conversation. We often ask our guests to leave the audience with a piece of advice. You've had an interesting journey, and what would that piece of advice be?
I think it would be through all of the things that I do, and I think in this day and age, we all tend to take on a lot in our lives. Take time for you. Mm-hmm. Take time to sit and just relax and do those things that bring you joy. Because I've realized as I've gone through my journey, you know, Edgewise is its own thing now. It lives and breathes unto itself. Me as Ashley, I'm a separate person. And while I'm attached to Edgewise, I am much more than just that. And so it's exploring, you know, I love to scuba dive and I love to read and I love to travel. And it's making sure that I do those things in my life that are most fulfilling, that kind of refill that cup so that I can be most effective in the roles that I've set up for myself.
You know what's interesting about what you just said? When I reached out to you to do this, and then sent the invite, your email bounced back to me saying, very similar to that, I am off, recharging, and I'm thinking, dear God, I reached out to her at a time when she's trying to recharge, right? But you got back to me, and I'm thinking, oh, I appreciate that very much. So this is the kind of person you are. Obviously, you're trying to recharge, and these two buccos reach out to you to consume your time on a Saturday, no less.
I'll be honest, my phone is never off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's then vetting that a little bit, right? When you're off and you're recharging and reconnecting, of, you know, picking up kind of what are those things that you really need to get to right away, and other things that I've learned to just say, you know what, that can wait. Or to, you know, offload that onto some of the employees that I have now that do a wonderful job in helping me with that.
Well, it's funny, though, when you talk about business, and I know my children are always like, Dad, you're never off. You know, worked in business development for 30 years, so I didn't own the business. But when you're business development, you own the business. Absolutely. Like, you're contributing to the bottom line. So if someone emails you, you know, at 11 o'clock, you do feel the need to respond. I think I'm getting better after 30 years managing that. Struggle with it. But, you know, when you're 14-year-old, you're in Montreal on a family vacation, and he says to you, Dad, you know, like, what are you doing? You're on your phone. So, you know, at that point, I had 27 employees or something reporting me. That was, you know, I didn't want to go back to that, I could tell
Madness.
you. No, but I love listening to you talk about how you manage that, you know.
Thanks.
It's been very educational, Alan. Ashley, you know, you're doing some really interesting things based in Newfoundland. Your social media, I see you're doing all kinds of stuff on the West Coast. It's fantastic. I love the leadership that you're showing, and, you know, good luck with the business and Econext. You know, let's see where that goes. I look forward to seeing what the staff and the volunteers do with that, you know.
Well, another wonderful edition of Gale Force Winds, and what a pleasure it has been to be in conversation with Ashley Noseworthy here today. Learning, quite honestly. I've learned a lot, and I think that our guests will learn a lot through this conversation. As we do more commerce on the ocean, I think we have to be a little bit more respectful about what we're doing and the sound that we're putting in there, because it is affecting things, and I'm so glad that I got educated on that here today. I wish you all the very best into the future, and I hope you do dive into that PhD, although uncertain where you'll fit it in, but best of luck with it. Keep traveling, keep spreading this message, and it has been an absolute pleasure to hear you talk about your passion here today. I can tell you that I'm sure your mom is going to watch this, and I'm sure she's going to be very proud of you, and for good reason. So thank you very much for joining Gale Force Winds, and I always like to leave the audience with my own piece of advice, and quite simply, the world needs more Ashley Noseworthy.
Thank you for tuning in to Gale Force Winds. That's Gale Force Winds, WINS.com.